This is Unit 21, excretion. Hang on tight because this is pretty complicated. We'll begin with Part A, general function, and Part B, anatomy. This unit consists of 6 parts divided into 5 videos. This video is Parts A and B, as mentioned. Part C, urine production, has been divided into 2 videos. Part D, urine regulation, is 1 video, and parts E and F in the last video. Let's look at the general function of the urinary system. The human body tends to gain and lose substances. Gain tends to increase levels of substances by ingestion, that is, intake, metabolism. Loss tends to decrease levels of substances. Excretion or output in the urine, loss in the feces, and loss through the skin. The human body carries out metabolism that produces waste and excess substances, especially nitrogen-containing substances. A problem with animals is they have no way of storing nitrogen-containing substances. So these substances pose a pretty big waste management problem. For example, the amino groups from excess amino acids, nucleic acids from DNA and RNA, and creatine phosphate from muscle metabolism. There are 3 general functions of the urinary system. Probably the most important is regulation. It's controlled mainly by controlling loss of substances. Especially important are sodium and water. Of course, excretion itself is an important role. Waste and excess substances, mainly metabolic wastes, are excreted. Animals, as we mentioned, can't store excess amino acids and other such nitrogen-containing products. So the amino groups from excess amino acids are changed to ammonia, which is then changed to urea. Nucleic acids are changed to uric acid. Creatine phosphate from muscle metabolism is changed to creatinine. The urinary system also has some important endocrine functions. The kidneys secrete renin. This is an enzyme produced by Juxtaglomular complex, which you'll hear about a little later. And this changes angiotensinogen to angiotensin 1. That probably sounds vaguely familiar because we mentioned this in the previous unit. Erythropoietin is another that stimulates red blood cell production. Homeostasis can be a tricky concept because we need to be careful and distinguish between a direct effect of something on something else and the role of homeostasis in returning an effect on something back to normal. You'll see what we're getting at as we progress on. It's especially important in understanding the function of the kidney. Look at it this way. I may give you this phrase. The direct effect of constriction of the afferent arteriole is to, and then I'd continue with the answer. Or, to maintain homeostasis, if the systemic blood pressure increases, the afferent arteriole will do something. Water is one of the important substances that must be regulated. Water is gained through ingestion, and on the average, it's 2,600 milliliters a day. Intake is regulated by thirst. We'll look at that in the next slide. Sweat has 1/2 the osmotic pressure of plasma, so it's hypotonic. So sweat is mostly water that's lost. So we're a little misled when we see these ads about these energy drinks that are filled with electrolytes. Certainly, if you lose electrolytes, you need to replace them. But ordinary sweating is getting rid of mostly water, and so the goal is to replace the water. Potassium loss influences thirst. Remember, potassium is an abundant intracellular ion, so decreased intracellular potassium causes a slight decrease in cell volume, and that increases thirst. Metabolism. Metabolism produces about 300 milliliters of water a day. Water is also lost. The total average, again, 2,600 milliliters a day. So notice in a normal individual, the gain and loss is the same. Excretion averages perhaps 1,500 milliliters a day. Feces, perhaps 100, and insensible water loss by skin as well as lungs averages around 1,000 milliliters a day. You're aware that you lose water through your lungs when you stand in front of a mirror and exhale onto the mirror. It fogs up. What about thirst? In the extracellular fluid of the body, a decrease in water concentration is the same thing as saying an increase in solute concentration. For example, if you have a solution that's 90% water, that means 10% solute. If you decrease the water to 80%, that means the solute makes up 20%. Well, solute concentration is proportional to osmotic pressure. So you would have an increase in osmotic pressure with a decrease in water concentration. This acts on thirst center cells in the hypothalamus. These happen to be sensitive to the extracellular fluid osmotic pressure. This causes water loss from cells, including the thirst center cells. It leads to the cells shrinking. This includes the cells in the hypothalamus. When the cells shrink, the nervous system promotes the sensation of thirst. Thirst is also caused by decreased blood volume and decreased blood pressure. What about sodium? Sodium is gained through ingestion. It averages 10.5 grams a day. The total body sodium levels is around 100 grams. Intake regulation does occur, but it's poorly understood. We know, for example, animals search for salt licks for their intake of sodium. Loss of sodium occurs. The total loss is the same as the intake, roughly 10.5 grams a day. It's lost through excretion. The kidneys excrete roughly 10 grams a day. The feces may lose roughly 1/4 of a gram, 0.25 a day, and the skin average maybe 0.25 grams a day. Let's take a look at Part B, anatomy. We'll look at development briefly, gross anatomy, then internal features of the kidney, and finally the nephron. Regarding the development of the urinary system develops from an intermediate mesoderm that becomes 3 successive tubular structures. In order, there's the pronephros that forms an early embryonic kidney, drained by a duct called the pronephric duct. These are both embryonic structures. This then transitions into a mesonephros that forms a later embryonic kidney and a duct called the mesonephric duct, which drains it. This later becomes part of the male reproductive system. And then finally, the metanephros that forms the adult kidney, the metanephric duct, which becomes the ureter. Looking at the gross anatomy, the kidney is located in the upper lateral sides of the abdominal cavity, located behind the perineum, and so we refer to the kidney as retroperitoneal. It's covered by an outer renal fascia, an adipose capsule, and then a connective tissue renal capsule. The hilus is the indented medial surface of the kidney, the ureter, the tube draining the kidney to the urinary bladder. The blood supply is very straightforward. It's supplied by a renal artery and drained by a renal vein. The relatively simple hookup of the kidney to the body is the reason kidney transplants have been done for years. The urinary bladder is the sac which collects urine from the kidneys through the ureters, and the urethra is the tube extending from the urinary bladder to the outside of the body. Let's look at the components of the kidney. The cortex is the outer substance of the kidney, often lighter in color than the inner part. The medulla is the inner substance of the kidney. It's often darker in color than the cortex. The medulla includes pyramids, roughly triangular-shaped regions of the medulla. The renal papillae are the tips of the pyramids extending into a space called the renal pelvis. The pelvis is the expanded part of the urethra as it extends within the kidney. It has extensions. Large ones are called the major calyces, plural for calyx. The smaller ones are the minor calyces, smaller extensions of the major calyx. The blood vessels within the kidney include an interlobar artery, branches of the renal artery that extend from deep within the kidney, conducting blood toward the surface, joining with the arcuate arteries. The arcuate artery, a branch of the interlobar artery, it extends parallel to the surface of the kidney, and it conducts blood to the interlobular arteries. The interlobular or cortical radiate arteries, these are branches of the arcuate arteries which extend again toward the surface of the kidney. They conduct blood to a vessel called the afferent arteriole. The interlobar or cortical radiate veins arise from the capillary net of the nephron, and they drain blood into the arcuate artery. The arcuate vein, I should have said. This vein arises from the interlobular veins, draining the blood to the interlobar veins. The interlobar vein arises from the arcuate and drains blood into the renal veins. The nephron is the functional unit of the kidney. Each kidney contains something like 500,000 nephrons. It consists of a vascular component, that is, blood vessels, and a tubular component, microscopic tubules. Now, some prefer to consider the nephron just to be the vascular component, but I prefer to lump the vessels with it. Two types of nephrons are the short cortical nephron and the longer juxtamedullary nephron. The vascular component includes microscopic blood vessels associated with the nephron. They include the afferent arteriole. These are branches from the interlobular artery supplying blood to a structure called the glomerulus. They contain granular cells, modified smooth muscle cells. These cells are stimulated to contract by the sympathetic nervous system, angiotensin II, and adenosine, and they relax under the action of nitric oxide. I mention these items now because we'll come back to them later. The glomerulus is a bundle of capillaries. They're located within the Bowman's capsule. They receive blood from the afferent arteriole. They contain pores, so they're very highly permeable. The efferent arteriole extends from the glomerulus and supplies blood to the capillary net. It has few of these granular cells. The capillary net is a framework of capillaries draining blood from the efferent arteriole, which surrounds the tubular component of the nephron. The veins draining the nephron then lead to the interlobular veins.
Tubular component consists of microscopic tubules in the nephron. They're listed in order of fluid flow. There's the Bowman's capsule, or glomerular capsule. It's an enlarged end of the tube surrounding the glomerulus. The proximal convoluted tubule, PCT, is a twisted tube containing the Bowman's capsule and Henle's loop. Now notice the name. Proximal, meaning close to the Bowman's capsule, convoluted, meaning twisted, and tubule. The Henle's loop, or nephron loop, is a curved tube connecting the proximal convoluted tubule and the distal convoluted tubule. It includes the descending limb, the first part of Henle's loop, which arises from the PCT and extends toward the medulla of the kidney, and the ascending limb of Henle, the second part of Henle's loop, which extends toward the cortex of the kidney to the distal convoluted tubule. The distal convoluted tubule is the twisted tube connecting Henle's loop to the collecting tubule. Again, the name distal meaning more distant from the Bowman's capsule. Convoluted is twisted. The collecting tubule or duct is the tube connecting the distal convoluted tubule with the renal pelvis. Associated structures of the nephron include the renal corpuscle. This is a unit consisting of the Bowman's capsule and the glomerulus. It was named because early on, when the kidney was studied, these became pretty obvious under a microscope. The juxtaglomular complex. This is not shown in the figure, but it's a structure formed by a junction of the PCT or the DCT and the afferent arteriole. It contains baroreceptors. In reality, the nephron doesn't look like this diagram. It's more like a plate of cooked spaghetti with many, many tubes all twisted together. What about the cells of the nephron? Well, the Bowman's capsule contains an outer layer with simple squamous epithelium and an inner layer of cells called podocytes. These podocytes have arm-like processes with foot-like extensions that surround the capillaries, leaving gaps called filtration slits. The podocytes wrap around the capillary like wrapping your hand around a post with your fingers slightly overlapped. The cells of the nephron also include, in the proximal convoluted tubule, simple cuboidal epithelium. The luminal border of the cells contain microvilli. Now remember, the lumen is the space inside a tube. The Henle's loop, the descending limb, contains a thick part with simple cuboidal epithelial cells and a thin segment containing simple squamous epithelium. Henle's loop, ascending, has a thick segment with simple cuboidal epithelium. The distal convoluted tubule also consists of simple cuboidal epithelial cells. It contains ADH and aldosterone receptors. It includes a structure called the macular densa cells. These contain sodium and chloride receptors and secrete signal molecules, such as adenosine and nitric oxide. The collecting tubule, again, also consists of cuboidal epithelial cells. It too contains ADH and aldosterone receptors.
And this is the end of parts A and B of Unit 21. You're now ready to progress to the first part of Part C, urine production.